Welcome to The Wrap. My name is Brian Murphy. I'm a WRAL reporter alongside Will Doran, a state government reporter for WRAL. Welcome, Will.
We're going to have a great episode today. There's been a lot happening this week. You think usually right after the primaries it's kind of slow, but not this week.
A lot of the news has been driven by this exclusive WRAL news poll that we've done, and we've polled on issues like immigration and abortion, of course, all the horse race issues as well, Biden or Trump, Robinson or Stein. So we're going to get to all those results in a second. The launch of sports betting happened this week, and we did some polling on that as well.
Something you've been covering for years.
Unfortunately, or fortunately, it does feel like a weight has been lifted in some ways. Sports betting has been birthed, and there have been very little hiccups on it so far. We'll see when the numbers start coming in and the problem gambling and all that stuff, but the rollout has been pretty smooth. Also in this episode, we'll talk about Michele Morrow, the GOP nominee for the Department of Public Instruction, the superintendent of public instruction. She's found herself in the news once again. Also, an update on runoffs. The primary election was earlier this month, and now we have some news about who will and who won't be calling for a runoff. And then lastly, a story that you've covered. We'll talk a little bit about Michael Ray. He's a Democrat who lost in the primary, but now he's saying that maybe there were some problems with his election.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. But let's jump into this polling first that you were talking about. I mean, we have probably 15, 20 stories up on our website for people who want to dive into the details on this. Because, I mean, it was a huge poll. It asked about your thoughts on the candidates, your thoughts on the issues, tons of detail on kind of just how North Carolina voters are feeling right now. And with 8 months to go till the election? Yeah,
it's getting closer every single day, it feels like. And you've written most of those stories that are appearing on our website. Let's start with the big one, right? Trump versus Biden, a rematch of 2020. Certainly this isn't going to be a two-person race because they're going to have a lot of third-party candidates involved. But what is the polling telling us about how excited North Carolinians might be for this matchup?
Yeah, they are not excited for this matchup. 55% said that they wish they had other options on the ballot. And I will note that we just had the primary in which voters are deciding which options are going to be on the ballot. And only 28% of people participated in that primary. So, if you want to have a voice, you got to actually go and vote. But even though most people don't like the idea of having this rematch, it looks like Trump is at least on pace currently to win North Carolina for the third straight time. Obviously he won here in 2016 by about 4.5 points over Hillary Clinton. It was much closer in 2020. It was only about a 1.5 percentage point win over Biden. This poll showed a bigger lead this time over Biden, about a 5-point lead over Biden with 5% of voters undecided. It was Trump 50, Biden 45.
Again, there will be other options on the ballot. And I'm very interested to see if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. can get on the ballot here in North Carolina. He's attempting to through the We the People Party. He'll need to collect some more signatures, but I saw that the Constitution Party has now achieved enough signatures to get on the ballot. Of course, the Libertarian Party is going to be on the ballot. There may be one or two more. So people will have options, and I wonder if that 50-45 that we heard about in the poll kind of drops. The numbers maybe drop for both major party candidates. Well, there were some deeper questions on the poll about how they feel about these candidates and Biden's mental acuity and other questions. Was there any of those results that really stood out to you?
Yeah, most people said that they did not care about the candidate's age. Biden's 81, Trump is 77. Neither of them is a spring chicken. But most voters said that they weren't bothered by their age. But what did bother most voters about both candidates was their mental competence. That was the second question we asked. And people were more worried about Biden's mental competence, but they were also worried about Trump's mental competence. And I think that probably drives the numbers that say, hey, I wish I had other options. Like, I don't necessarily think that either of these guys is a great pick. The third-party candidates could be huge. And in the past, typically the third-party candidates have taken away more from the Republican candidate than from the Democratic candidate. But, if the Green Party gets on the ballot, that could obviously, take away some Democratic voters. If RFK gets on, that's a little trickier because his positions are more aligned with the Republicans, but obviously his name is the most famous Democratic name, around.
Right, right, in maybe the country's history.
Yeah. So yeah, that's an interesting one to watch. I think the big thing here is going to be just, those 5% of people who say that they still haven't made up their mind. What is going to win them over and what is going to be driving them? And I don't think it'll come to a shock to anyone listening. It's the economy. And it's really just going to be about, okay, how do the economic numbers look over the next few months? How does this summer go? And does Biden get blamed for things going badly, or does he get credit for things kind of turning around? And, it's only a very small number of voters that, seem that they are still truly undecided, but that could be the margin of error that either candidate needs.
In a lot of ways, I feel like the economy, it doesn't really matter what the numbers say. It matters how you feel.
Yes.
Like, do you have a job? Do you have a good enough job? Are your costs going up? We in the news media and here at WRAL, we write a lot of stories, or we talk a lot on the television about the consumer price index and inflation and gas prices and eggs and what it might cost to go on vacation. But all of that is really individual to every voter, and whether they feel the economy is good or bad sometimes is not about those macro trends. It's about the very micro trends in their life.
Yeah. And there were some other issues, too, that kind of popped out. It looks like, as should be expected, immigration is going to be a big driver for Republicans. Abortion is going to be a big driver for Democrats. I was a little surprised to see that abortion wasn't seen with very much urgency, I guess you could say, among more moderate voters, independent voters. So if Democrats are looking for something to kind of reach those swing voters, I don't know that abortion is going to be the one issue that does it. It might be, we asked about guns, which were, actually, I was kind of surprised that most North Carolinians said that they want to see Congress take some action to pass a law addressing mass shootings. And then we asked some more questions. Okay, what do you, blame mass shootings on? And 74% said ease of access to guns. So, could, guns be an issue that drives some people? We'll see.
In addition to guns, you mentioned immigration. Certainly, there'll be immigration in the news. There's going to be a child migrant detention center in Greensboro that I'm sure is going to get a lot of attention over the next few weeks. And on the issue of guns, WRAL just did a documentary about the shooting deaths of young children and how gun safety and putting guns away and locking them up is a huge issue. And that's leading to many, many deaths here in North Carolina of juveniles. We've talked a lot about the presidential race and some of those larger issues. We also polled on a variety of issue or of races here in North Carolina. The governor's race, the superintendent of public instruction, the AG, all these are pretty high-profile races here in North Carolina.
Yes, and unlike the presidential race, there are a ton of undecided voters because the thing is, most of these kind of statewide executive branch races, it's brand new faces for everything. There's almost no incumbents who are up for re-election.
They're all running for higher office, it feels like.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Roy Cooper was term limited. He couldn't run again as governor, and that kind of created this domino effect where, Josh Stein and Mark Robinson are leaving their roles as attorney general and lieutenant governor to run for governor. Then you had other people leaving their jobs to run for their jobs. And so it's kind of led to this whole cascade of we're going to have actually a massive amount of turnover at the top levels of state government after these elections. And the polls found it was like 20% of voters say that they're undecided, which is not surprising. And so you know what that means? Get ready to see a whole lot of ads coming up as these candidates try to define themselves and their opponents. I think the silver lining for Democrats, obviously it was bad news for them in the presidential race. Trump with a 5-point lead, that's fairly commanding in a swing state like North Carolina. But even despite that, Stein was up 2 on Robinson. Now, that's more or less a tie, when you look at the margin of error and everything like that. But, for the poll to find basically, Josh Stein doing 7 percentage points better than Biden, that is exactly how Roy Cooper became governor the last 2 times. He won even when Trump was winning North Carolina. So I think some Democrats are looking at that and feeling pretty good about those early numbers. Obviously, still have a long time to go till the election. Lots going to happen between now and then. But let's take a break and then come back and we'll talk about some sports betting issues.
Welcome back to The Wrap. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Murphy, joined by Will Doran. One last thing before we leave those other political issues. Let's talk about the superintendent of public instruction race. Michele Morrow knocked off the incumbent Catherine Truitt in the GOP primary. She'll face Mo Green in the November general election. This is one of those races that you talked about, very close. I think, in North Carolina, basically, I give the Republicans like a 1.5 point lead. If you're a standard Republican and versus standard Democrat, if you look at all the election results in recent years, you're probably going to win 51-49 or some within that margin.
Yeah, that's true.
And so now we have, and Donald Trump looks like he's above that, but Mark Robinson is trailing. And now we have another race that's sort of been elevated. Michele Morrow, CNN, was out with a story sort of cataloging all of her tweets, her social media posts. And there is a lot of them, and they're highly controversial, including talking about a pay-per-view for the execution of Barack Obama, often talking about death to traitors, and she includes basically every Democrat you can think of as among traitors: Joe Biden, Roy Cooper, George Soros, Bill and Melinda Gates. I mean, the list is lengthy, and I'm interested in your opinion on what did the poll tell us, and then secondly, we've already seen Tom Tillis, who endorsed Catherine Truitt, sort of come out and kind of distance himself. Mark Robinson is a candidate that some have distanced themselves from. Michele Morrow is a candidate. Some of Donald Trump is a candidate. Like, there's a lot of Republicans at the top of the ticket here that other Republicans may have some unease about supporting.
Yeah, I mean, the primary results showed us that the GOP voters who turned out on March 5th for the primary took a very kind of hard right turn and elected really kind of all the candidates who were most closely associated with Donald Trump and his MAGA movement. And, even if they had to, kick out incumbents like Catherine Truitt, she loses to Michele Morrow, who has made all of these, pretty incendiary statements about, executing the governor, executing the president. She was at January 6th. She said that she opposed the violence, but, did support the intent of overturning the election. For Attorney General, you have U.S. Representative, Dan Bishop is the Republican nominee who voted, to overturn some election results when he was in Congress after January 6th. So, that's kind of just the slate of candidates that Republicans have chosen basically up and down the ballot this year. And so I think the big question is going to be how bothered by that are voters, particularly kind of more moderate Republicans who, might in a normal year not want to vote for a Josh Stein, might not want to vote for a Mo Green for superintendent of public instruction, but see the other options they have and say, I'm just going to have to hold my nose and vote for this Democrat and, hope that Republicans turn around next time.
A super interesting side note, I guess, to the AG race was this week in Congress. Both Jeff Jackson, who's the Democratic nominee, and Dan Bishop, the Republican nominee, are both members of the U.S. House. And this week they had to vote on banning TikTok, or at least forcing TikTok to divest itself of its parent company, which has ties to China. Jeff Jackson is known as a TikTok superstar, right? He's always on TikTok, and Dan Bishop has hit him for that many, many times. But when it came time to vote on this, Jeff Jackson actually did vote to, quote unquote, ban TikTok, while Dan Bishop was on the other side of the issue and voted against the ban on TikTok. And so just really strange bedfellows on this one issue with both members that are running for AG, both candidates for AG, right in the middle of it.
Yeah, that is going to be a fascinating race to watch, and a really important one. I went back through the timeline, and every single attorney general in North Carolina since 1968 has later run for either governor or U.S. Senate. So, whoever voters pick as the next attorney general, they're setting up for higher office, basically. I mean, obviously, they'll probably say all the right things. I'm just focused on doing my job in this office. But this is a stepping stone to something bigger. And so, it's going to be, I think, a really nasty race between the two of them. And, they obviously have a history. They served in the state Senate together for a few years and obviously did not get along there either. So.
Hard not to see Dan Bishop running for governor at some point in the future, maybe regardless of what happens in the race, but definitely if he were to win this race. One of the other polls that we did was about sports betting, which launched on Monday. And we also polled on casinos, which were a huge issue in the legislature last year. Actually held up the state budget for quite a while. And what I found fascinating about these results, two things. One, on the issue of casinos, 55% say they support casinos, adding casinos to the state in rural areas of the state. And if you remember, that was the proposal last year. only less than 30% oppose, and then there's a group that is not sure. And that 55% is pretty consistent. Meredith did a poll previously in this year. John Locke Foundation did a poll last year. They all 54, 55%. Every poll is coming out the same. Interesting that last year it got scrapped because of this, opposition, I guess, for lack of a better term, vocal opposition inside the legislature, also outside the legislature. Then you see this polling data, and it seems to indicate there is majority support. And that support really didn't change if you were in depending on what part of the state you were in, if you were in urban, suburban, rural. It was really consistent, across party ideology against, liberal conservative ideology. No matter what, the results were almost the same all the way across the board. I get a sense that maybe we'll be hearing about this poll in the future if casinos come back up.
Yeah, I mean, I think it surprised a lot of people how the casino push came about this year. I mean, it was completely a backroom deal and just tried to get kind of, pushed into the budget at the very last minute. And I think the process, almost as much as the policy itself, angered a lot of lawmakers. And also just kind of surprised a lot of voters. And we did see, some pretty substantial grassroots, opposition to these casinos. And so, I think there were a few politicians said, okay, let's pump the brakes. Let's be a little bit more careful about how we do this. And this polling certainly shows that, there's support for it. Of course, just because something's popular doesn't mean that the legislature is going to pass it.
Right. We've seen that on a variety of issues. On the sports betting, real quick, only 7% said they plan to frequently bet on sports now that it's legal in North Carolina. 53% of people said they don't plan to vote. I mean, I keep saying vote, that they don't plan to bet on sports at all.
Yeah, I don't know if I trust all those numbers.
The 7% was really interesting because, we have roughly 8.5 million adults in North Carolina. You're still talking at 7%. That's 600,000 North Carolinians who plan to frequently bet. I don't know if that means every week or multiple times a week. 600,000 people. I don't know why. That seemed to strike me as a big number.
Yeah, I mean, that's, more than the population of Raleigh.
Plans to bet frequently. Yeah. So we've talked a lot about the polls. We talked about Michele Morrow. Let's talk a little bit about all these runoffs. So there were several crowded GOP fields for the March primary election. Several of those were headed to a runoff. Brad Knott and Kelly Daughtry here in the 13th district, which kind of hugs Wake County. We also have Jim O'Neill and Hal Weatherman in the lieutenant governor's race. Dave Bolick and Jack Clark are also running for state auditor. That's going to runoff. But one that is not going to runoff kind of surprised me.
Yeah, the 6th district, which is sort of a central Greensboro area sort of district, not going to a runoff. And that was between the Trump-endorsed candidate Addison McDowell and the former U.S. congressman for that area of the state, Mark Walker. And Trump endorsed McDowell, who's a first-time candidate, didn't have really any name recognition at all. And he finished first. Walker was very close behind. Bo Hines was in this race. Several, at least 4 candidates got at least 10% of the vote. But what I found amusing is that Walker is dropping out of the race to go work for the Trump campaign. So that's one way to ensure that your record on endorsements goes up, is you just sort of offer the guy in second place a face-saving way out of the race. He's going to be the director of outreach for ministries and minorities. I may not have that title exactly right, but Mark Walker's a former pastor, and as a Republican had a really good relationship with the African American community. It was something he touted all the time when he was a member of Congress. He won some awards from the NAACP. He did a lot of work with HBCUs, of which his wife is a 2-time graduate, and so it feels like a soft landing spot for Mark Walker, and he doesn't have to potentially lose another race this time to a political newcomer. Yeah, pretty stunning, though. I don't know if I've ever heard of someone essentially being paid to drop out of a race.
And Walker was, up until less than 24 hours before he announced that he was dropping out, he was challenging McDowell to a debate on television in the Greensboro area. When I talked to him on election night, he told me, of course, no question about it, I believe was his quote, when I asked if he was going to ask for a runoff. But yes, a stunning kind of turnaround. One race that may, I guess, eventually be headed to a runoff is a very close race between Michael Ray, who's sort of a moderate Democrat, and a challenger who has beaten him. But now there's some news, and you reported on that.
Yeah, so this is in the state legislature, this district northeast of Raleigh, kind of on the Virginia border, Warren, Halifax, Northampton counties. And yeah, like you said, you have Michael Ray, who's been the incumbent in that district for 20 years in the state legislature. And he's a moderate Democrat. Basically, he's socially conservative. He still votes with Democrats on most issues, but he'll cross party lines, especially on some like pro-business things, environmental things, to vote with Republicans on those issues. And so he's been kind of a thorn in the side for the Democratic Party for a little while, just because of this, voting record that he has, not always going to toe the party line. And, political parties like people that toe the line. And so he got primaried by a more progressive challenger this year, and it looked like he lost by 41 votes on election night.
Right, 41 votes. When you hear about voting matters, he lost by 41 votes.
Yeah, out of thousands. And now he's protesting. This happened Friday morning. He's filed protests in all three counties, saying that all three counties had issues with the voting on both, on election day and during early voting. He said that there are problems with people who were given the wrong ballots when they showed up at the polls. There were problems with ballots potentially not being counted. He found a voter who said that she put her ballot into the voting machine and was looking at the little number on the front of the machine and noticed that it didn't change. Normally it ticks up by one to show that it's counted one more ballot, and she thinks that it didn't change, and that would mean, that her ballot wasn't counted. He said that there was actually a precinct official, like a poll worker, who was passing out basically campaign literature for his opponent, which would be a crime if it's true, if that did happen. And he said it worked. He did really badly in that precinct where that guy was helping out his opponent, allegedly. So there's a lot of issues that just kind of all over the place that he's identified. I should note his challenger, Rodney Pierce, is calling on him to drop this challenge. He's like, you lost. You're trying to change the rules after the fact and just kind of, try to abuse the system to do it. Just admit defeat. Your time's up. But obviously Michael Ray is not going to do that. And on Tuesday, some of these county boards of elections are going to meet to discuss his claims and figure out what to do about him.
Last thing, we'll close the wrap with this. Speaker Tim Moore met with the media earlier this week and discussed some of the issues that may come up. Talked about possibly strengthening the state's anti-Semitism laws, obviously as a reaction to what's happening in Israel and Gaza. Also talked about possibly wanting to get state employees larger raises. We'll see how much they want to dive into the budget. This is the short session, so not a lot of time before the general election, and you need to be out campaigning. Although for some, there are a lot of races that are not going to be really competitive in the fall. Either they're running unopposed or the district has been gerrymandered in such a way that there is really no competition either from the Republican or from the Democratic side. And so I do wonder if that will keep them here maybe a little bit longer, since there's less of an urge to get back and run.
Yeah, 80 to 90% of the state legislative races are settled now that the primary is over. There's only a very small sliver that are actually competitive. So, look up your address, see if you live in one of those competitive districts, and you need to be researching the candidates for November. But yeah, most of them are pretty much all said and done at this point. I will note that in that same gaggle that he did with the media, Speaker Moore was also asked about, do Republicans have any plans to enact, stricter abortion laws this year, or potentially do anything with IVF? We saw the Alabama Supreme Court come out with their ruling kind of cracking down on IVF. And he basically said, not my problem. He said that none of that's going to happen this year, and I'm going to be gone because, as people know, he just won his primary for a seat in Congress, and he's expected to win the general election as well. It's a pretty Republican-leaning district. So in 2025, he's going to be up in D.C., and he said, all that stuff is going to pretty much come down to who's the governor and whether or not Republicans have a veto-proof majority, supermajority or not, and we're just going to have to wait until 2025 and see how that goes.
That was my takeaway. I'm not hands off, and we'll see who wins between Robinson and Stein to decide what we do from there. He's Will Doran. I'm Brian Murphy. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of The Wrap. Check out WRAL.com for all of your NC Capitol coverage needs and to check out all those poll stories that Will referenced earlier in the episode. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.